perfectly honest with you, the big section is going to be the legislative chapter. So understand, this is going to be where the bulk of the terms are going to come from, even if there aren't as many articles. Now, when you look at this in the hybrid system, and we had started talking about this the other day, the voters, they are going to directly elect the president, which is something that we do not do here. Yes? Oh, my bad. The voters, indeed, are going to directly elect the president, which we don't do here, and the prime minister is not directly elected. They also elect the parliament. If you remember, the president will nominate the prime minister confirmed by the parliament. And then, of course, the president will appoint the cabinet. The president will appoint the courts. The president is effectively going to be the head of state, meaning the overall head of the government in terms of representing it to other countries. The prime minister is considered the head of government or the person that works inside the country. Now, what you also see, though, and let me make sure that I stress this because I don't know that I had done this the other day. In a parliamentary system, when you are a prime minister and you've got a majority party, you're going to be a very strong executive. The more parties that you have that create your coalition, the weaker executive you are. Let me slide by here, Whit. What you can probably suggest is that as prime minister, if indeed you are party A up here, and party A controls the commons, and basically party A is going to have their role in the court, what you're going to end up seeing is that this is probably going to be the second strongest executive in terms of the world. What you'll find, though, is that the more parties that you have, the weaker you become as an executive. Which means, frankly, of these systems that we're talking about, if it is a coalition, this is going to be the second weakest executive in a coalition type situation. You got a majority party, you are the strongest, second strongest of these. But if you are in a coalition, second weakest. Let me slide by you again. Coming over here to the French president. If the French president is from party A, and if indeed a majority of the legislature is party A, that means the prime minister, that means the cabinets, that means the courts. And if you've got a high approval, say about 70%, you are going to be the strongest executive in the world. Because when you think about this, you as president have got the ability to both nominate and potentially to fire the prime minister or the head of government. So when you think about this, you as president with high approval and majority party are going to be able to do more as an executive than any other executive in the world. What you'll also see, and go back to Russia on this one, Vlad Putin was president of Russia. He was president and he had term limits and he followed those term limits and stepped away. He, because of his popularity and his party, was both head of state and basically head of government, and everybody knew that prime minister was really nothing but a figurehead. At the end of his term limit as president, he stepped over and became prime minister. And because of his popularity as prime minister, formerly as president, but now as prime minister, and his party still controls everything, he is effectively the head of government, and frankly, he is also the head of state. Because the guy that he wanted them to elect as president got elected. So in this hybrid system, there is a strong executive. But note in here, since you really have two executives, either of these two could be strong. And to this point, let's turn this around. Let's say that you've got an approval rating that's about 40. Let's say that the prime minister ends up coming from the other party. What you'll see here is that, in fact, this is now going to be the weakest executive out there. Because this is the only system where you've got two executives, and this president from the other party in this situation, prime minister, is going to have a natural rival, and they're going to butt heads. What's that? What do you need?
Turn off the computer and turn on the light.
Oh, now you want the light on.
No, the computer on. Just turn off.
If I turn off the computer, then there's just going to be a blank screen.
Yeah, but they want to see.
We want to see the board. It's helping.
Yeah.
The board.
Just
There
turn
you go.
just
There you go.
That's what you want. Okay.
Yay.
No.
Okay. All right, so as we keep going here, in this instance with the president, the way that they did this, and this is what is called cohabitation in France. Cohabitation in a cultural sense is like shacking up. When members of opposite sexes live together without being married, they are technically cohabitating. Well, in this instance, you've got members of opposing parties and members of opposing parties trying to work within the same government. This is cohabitation, and it does happen when you've got these dueling executives like this. In the French case, with the president, they focus the president's powers outside of the country, and they focus the prime minister's inside of the country, and that's how these two had a rough coexistence. As president, you could still fire this prime minister, but you've still got to nominate a replacement. And if the parliament supports the prime minister and does not support whom you appoint, that basically means that you as president are going to begin to look weaker and weaker as you go. So with this in mind, you are either going to have the strongest executive coming out of a hybrid, or believe it or not, you're going to have the weakest one, depending upon the role of this other party. Go ahead.
Yeah, how does it really work when you have the prime minister coming from the opposition party? Because the president would, appointing a prime minister for a different party. How's it going to work?
Okay, again, what they do is they basically divide up the functions. And when they divide up the functions, the prime minister is going to be the one that passes the laws, that runs the government on a day-to-day basis, that deals with what's happening inside the country's borders. It's going to be the president, on the other hand, that will focus his or her powers outside in terms of foreign affairs. So, since they're working technically in different areas, they're not going to butt heads as much, although it's still possible that they would. When you look at the American president, and the American president really falls in between, because when you think about this, the American president is both head of state and head of government. So this executive is going to be one that is going to be working within the borders of the country. This one is also going to be the primary representative for the country outside. And when you look at these other systems, here the prime minister in parliamentary only works within the borders. The monarch is the one that's doing more foreign things. Here it's going to be the president outside, but it's also going to be the prime minister, same party or no, basically on the inside. A strong leader like a Vlad Putin, for example, was somebody that basically combined the role of president with prime minister. He was president, he did both. Now he's prime minister where there's not a term limit, which means he has now combined the office of the president with him as prime minister. So indeed what you're seeing here is that he's still strong. It's just now there's a strong prime minister. And I think what you're going to see in these hybrid systems is there's going to be more of a tug of war between a president and a prime minister to figure out who controls what. Figure out who controls what. Marianne, what's the title of the article that you have since we're talking about strong executives? Africa's new cash prize for top leaders. Go ahead. What have you got?
So basically, in Africa, to discourage them, we talk a lot about the corruption and the problems in Africa. And so to solve that, this enterprising entrepreneur decided to create an award similar to, like a Grammy or an Oscar. Like if you're a good leader and you meet certain standards in Africa, then you're given a cash prize of $5 million.
Okay, because there's been so much tumult, if you will, and turmoil in Africa at different points, and because there have been corruption, because there's been violence and genocide and different things like this, there is a foundation. And who was the foundation created by?
The man's name?
Yeah.
His name is Mo Ibrahim.
South Africa.
Mo Ibrahim, yeah, exactly. Basically what he's saying is, if you establish a government in Africa, particularly a democratic government, if you eliminate corruption, if you provide better for the people, if you are transparent, meaning people can come in and look into your system, bottom line is, if you are the best African leader, we are going to give you a cash prize for doing a good job. Now question, Whit, let me come over to you. There are places in the world where it's expected that people will do a good job. There are other places where corruption is the norm. Does it mention in there, Marianne, how much corruption costs African countries?
Yes, it does. $148 billion a year, or roughly 25% of the continent's gross domestic product.
Okay, 148 billion. And how many countries are in Africa, roughly? 52. That's my understanding. So if you do basic math and you say 150 billion and you're saying there's roughly 50 countries, you're saying that on average that corruption there is going to cost the countries about 3 billion per year per country.